Hey everyone, thanks for watching Content and Conversation. We're back again with another great episode, today focusing on publishers with two amazing guests in this area. Matthew Brown, founder of MGB Labs, a consultancy for B2B companies and publishers as well, and Marshall Simmonds, president and founder of Define Media Group, which is also a specialty in publishers, audience development for enterprise companies. Specifically, I thought to bring both of these amazing guests in to talk about content strategy for publishers. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having
So yeah, really the first thing that comes top of mind is 2018 now. You guys have a lot of experience in this area. How do publishers view SEO today that they didn't in the past, or what's the current mindset in the publisher war rooms today? Marshall, maybe start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Publishing has gone through a crazy evolution if you think about just in the last 10 years alone. But I feel like SEO is getting new life right now, and that's thanks to probably our best salesman, which is Mark Zuckerberg at this point. The fact that every publisher has come to us and said, you know, social's a little soft right now. I mean, that's kind of what's happening in the last couple years. And as they mess with the newsfeed, it continues to push people back, not people, but it pushes companies back to SEO. And so it's seen this, you know, this renaissance, if you will, of new attention. Newsrooms are back into it. Previous companies that weren't at all interested in that kind of content creation and that focusing on words and their audience and really converting through search, their focus is now changing. And so that gives people like us good opportunity to get back into those publishing newsrooms or back into those editorial teams and start teaching again.
Great.
So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if you look back, analytics has helped a lot. If you look back at some publishers that have 10 years, 15 years of analytics at this point, what has been the most defensible, consistent channel that they've looked at? Search is right up there with direct traffic and what they've done with brand. And social's kind of been all over the place. Like when we were doing publishing in the mid-2000s, what's our dig strategy? And so all of that has kind of fluctuated out into, hey, organic search has been one of the most reliable things that we've done for a long time. And now with the Facebook newsfeed changes, it even looks even a little cleaner than it did 2 years ago. So I think that's how publishers say, other than we want to build our brand, we want to be known that when people see us in the search results, we get a click. Other than that, organic search is it's really good for just about anything a publisher can do.
How about channels like LinkedIn seems like it's on the rise. Pinterest has kind of been a consistent one. So curious what you guys are seeing from those two channels specifically. Are they, for publishers, like are they significant? Are they growing?
Well, Pinterest has gone through an interesting shift in that they opened up their wall. I mean, basically, whereas before it was a bit of a walled garden, you know, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity outside to really promote. But what has changed in the last, I would say, year or so, depending on what you're looking at, is we've seen a new opportunity around images. And that before, I mean, I think, you know, some of us have seen this where image search was more or less dead. There wasn't a really good opportunity just because of some of the changes, the UI, UX changes that Google Images made. They weren't giving you a click. We had these vast image galleries that we had spent a lot of time optimizing, and then we just saw that traffic just reduced to nothing. Pinterest has given us a new life because they're allowing crawlers to access that content, and so we actually see that as a pretty good alternative, even better than I would say like even Instagram, which is surprising. Instagram, we were talking about this last night, is not easy to work with. But Pinterest has been getting easier. I don't know what your experience has been, especially on LinkedIn too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think LinkedIn for publishers, you know, if you're doing big publishing, has this advantage. If you do a dev blog or a business blog or like an inside baseball at this publication, you're talking about how you know, the New York Times does this and Wired does this and a lot of publications. We made the move to HTTPS, or we did something that's notable that's probably not like we would put it in the issue or we'd put it online, but if you put it on LinkedIn, you're reaching the audience that probably cares about that. And that's like kind of like for business writing, that might be like getting on Hacker News. Is people people will share how we did this at this publication and how we made this move. And I think LinkedIn has been super useful for distributing that kind of content that might not necessarily fit on the homepage or a section front of a publication.
So you're talking specifically the change with Google where now you can visit, they allow you to go back and visit the URL. Well, before you would just go straight to the image file.
Right. Right.
How significant of a traffic change is that?
Yeah, so how it used to be, it was a while ago, but 2013, Google Images used to, when you would click on an image, it would load your site in the background. And you would just get this overlay of the image that you clicked on. And Google, being the ad network that they are, they restricted that access basically, where they would offer the image, but you didn't get the click anymore. And that was significant.
Yeah.
When you're working with a company like National Geographic, and they, the fulcrum of their company is around these incredible images, and driving traffic to that page, maybe to buy, maybe to subscribe, whatever that call to action would be. And that shifted at 12:59 on December 31st, 2012. And we just saw the traffic just plummet as a result of that UI change. That was a big deal. And so we had to start getting creative around that. That's where you saw this change to infographics. You saw that big surge of infographics in 2013, 2014. That was in part to like, what do we do with these images now? How do we promote image galleries? How do we promote image content? We've got all these celebrity images. You see these slideshows, and people started working with different iterations of how to present slideshows in a way, whether it's going to be multiple clicks or are you going to dump them all on one page. And you see publishers getting very creative with how they're leveraging their image databases now. Like we said before, Pinterest has helped with that. But I still feel like they haven't quite figured it out, honestly.
Publishers
haven't.
Okay.
Publishers haven't quite figured out how to do it because they still want to leverage this.
It's really inconsistent.
Yeah, I think it's inconsistent. Yeah.
Like I see a lot of that where it's just we went slideshows and we went galleries, and now we're doing a video hub, and now we're embedding videos and articles. And it just seems like no matter who I work with, there's some different configuration of how they want to handle multimedia. But I don't see a unified publisher strategy that you see consistently people employing for images and video.
So how about, you guys have a lot of experience training internal content teams, publishers. We obviously, even if it's not with publishers, other clients, we sometimes interface with them and train them. I'm just curious if you guys have any tips for getting people on board, getting them on board with SEO, training them up, and what are your frameworks for doing that?
It used to be, and I know you subscribe to this too, what tools can you feasibly ask a writer, a journalist, a content creator to use in their daily process? And now I've gotten to the point where I really just want them to understand how to read a Google SERP. So for organic search, if I bring in something, I'm like, okay, let's look at all of the search results we can see about Nike. We're covering Nike, for example. You can literally generate just about any type of search result possible with different configurations of Nike. Local results, news results, shopping results, depending on how you structure your content. So if you can get a content creator or a writer to understand, if you're covering a topic, here are all the things, the SERPs that you should be able to compete on, and here are SERPs you should stay completely away from. That will change how they view the topic that they're writing about, maybe more so than if they're trying to sift through data from a keyword tool or something that you show them how to do. If they understand the difference between Nike earnings report and all of the different things that Google puts in for top stories or a featured snippet or an answer box, if they understand that, I feel like over time they instinctively learn how to frame the topic they're writing about or an article to capture organic search other than just, I wrote it and I don't rank. It's like, yeah, you wrote it because you have a Nike shopping result over here. Like that's bad. Or you have a one featured snippet that dominates the page. So I would almost spend an hour with a content team and literally just be like, let's look at what Google is doing today and how it changes how you view a topic.
Do you have any specific examples there? I'd love to if you could think through one specific one. You mentioned Nike earnings report or something like that. I don't know if you could touch on that. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah,
how do you explain that?
So for B2B clients, cloud services often comes up as one of their products. So, a lot of them integrate with Amazon and AWS in some way. AWS searches change so dramatically depending on, is it AWS services? Is it solutions? How do I integrate AWS? Like if you say services or solutions in an AWS search, it goes add, answer box, and then organic, like probably below the fold on death. Like it's crazy. No, like you're buying that search result. Whereas if you search for how do I integrate AWS into my cloud services, or ask a question, or use a keyword modifier that's a little bit different, all of a sudden that looks like an organic search result that they could capture. And so AWS is sort of like the Nike of the B2B, like depending on how you search for it, very quickly you can figure out these are organic search results we need to be in versus, okay, we need to be here, but we need to buy our way into this versus let's stay away from here. This is like totally a research SERP, it's informational, we don't want it. So that for B2B, that's a good example of one of those permutations where let's figure out which keywords generate the searches we're looking for.
So it's like it sounds like commerciality versus not is kind of a good easy. That's probably relatively simple to educate writing teams on.
Right, or there's two parts of the funnel. Like we feel like people who are doing these AWS searches, they're ready to purchase. There's intent there. These are informational. We're getting answer boxes and we're getting Stack Overflow. We're getting these services. They might want to try to get in those search results to get that top of funnel brand. We want to be present here. It's informational. It probably won't lead. It's probably not great lead gen, but we want that branding effect. So you almost start looking at it as two different funnels that way.
Gotcha. Okay. How about you, Marshall?
Yeah. So when you're working with like a 50-person newsroom or a 25-person editorial team, our whole approach and strategy at Define is to get out of the way as quickly as we can. So we look to empower all those people as quickly as possible. So we do that because we can't be the choke point. We can't handle 50 people coming to us and saying, hey, could you go do this keyword research? That just doesn't scale. And also it doesn't help the company retain that information through the IP transfer that we're usually, that's our MO, is to empower all of these people to understand their audience, first off, how their audience is engaging with a particular piece of content or topic, and to go validate it. And give them the tools, like Matthew was saying, give them the tools so they can just go do some quick, and then of course we don't want to add to the workflow. We don't want to add to that day in, day out work that they have to do, especially if you're on deadline, but you got to know how your audience is engaged with a topic. And so if you can give them a quick primer around, how does Google Trends work, how to go out there and use SEMrush, and within 5 minutes really identify how your audience is engaging around that topic, yeah, it can have a tremendous result. Not only that, but they feed back into the system because all those editorial teams, they meet often and they talk, and they're all motivated by competition and by each other. And so that's a good thing. And with just a little bit of course corrections and guidance, SEO will really take hold quickly. With just a few trainings here and there and some tools and resources. Because you'll start to see things like when people are they looking for diet or are they looking for nutrition? And you look at those two terms and they're vastly different in the audience. And you show that to an editorial team, they get it immediately. They'll get it and they realize like that tool is an incredible resource to help the newspaper, to help me, to help my personal brand, to help my article, et cetera. And so that's how we usually try to engage with editorial teams, is like Matthew said, with tools, but also with some process. So everybody becomes this SEO evangelist, so they all understand the basic best practices.
Nice. Is there like any specifics around team size and also how often you go out for a training? Just curious, in the weeds.
Yeah.
You say month 2 you're there for training, or you need to get there day 1.
Editorial teams love to forget about SEO. They've got right. So much going on, and it's the first thing because they've got a lot of pressure. And some organizations they require a team to put out a piece a day, or sometimes 2 pieces a day. If you're looking at Business Insider, they have to do 3 to 5 a day. I mean, think about that. Wow. 3 to 5 posts, major posts a day. And that has to be researched. It has to be, well written. You have to have a good headline that's both sociable, I guess, or is a social driven headline, as well as has some search implications and considerations. That's not easy to do, and you have to do it with a character count limit. And so we found that the best way to get ahead of that is just repetition, lots and lots of repetition around keyword research, around how to write headlines, around best practices. And the other thing, the rub is that Google's constantly changing things, but we can't. Because if we were to go into an editorial team and say, oh, everything we said this week is now changed, they're going to forget SEO even quicker. So we have to be pretty consistent in our messaging, but we have to be, the message has to be repeated over and over.
That makes sense. Yeah. Anything to touch on that?
I think it's been, like if you do SEO 101, which you have to when you start, I think you can get editorial teams, and this is true for both news and non-news. We create content, did we SEO it? And so you get that kind of apply the gloss of SEO to whatever we did, which I think has sort of limited value over the long term. So I think it's useful to, take a piece of content or, what they're writing about and come back and do like a postmortem on, okay, so this is what happened. Here's how, when it was indexed, here's the SEO facets of what happened, here's how it ranks, here's the traffic we got, were there conversions, and start getting people to think of SEO at the beginning rather than just, we wrote it, now apply SEO. So I think the SEO 101 trainings are necessary, but to get content creators and writers to really think, I need to figure out how this fits into the digital ecosystem and where it'll start and where it'll finish. I think those writers get an advantage over people that are just like, did we run that by the SEO team? So training 2, 3, and 4 should be, let's look at what we did, how we could improve it, what we might do differently, what Google did with it. I think they learn a lot, and they end up being, I think, better writers for it overall, even though initially they're like, ugh, SEO. Do we have to listen to the SEO people again? It's like, yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
It's you probably should do it.
Yeah. Nice. So one side thought that came up there where you're talking about some writers, and it kind of relates to what we do in pitching publishers a lot of the times when we're not working with a publisher directly, is you mentioned they publish 5 times. They need to write 5 times a day sometimes. And that's an interesting insight for content marketing teams, is potentially that kind of writer probably would be more receptive to our kind of pitches. And I'm also curious from your guys' vantage point, you're not probably getting all of these pitches, but what is the most common structure for people like us or other PR teams? How do you kind of penetrate that wall or kind of get involved there?
So to understand your question, how would you work on a PR team that's scoping out like a content project?
No, I guess even for the Business Insider situation, what is the editorial team structured like? Or that writer who's writing 5 times a day, do they most often, they're given their topics from someone else? So in terms of the latter, are you most recommended to pitch an editor above them? Or is it most companies kind of like, you do have some insight at that 5 articles a day?
Yeah. It depends. So a lot of publishers chase the news cycle because that's what they have to do. But you get, and sometimes that's referred to as hard news. If that particular publication will write feature pieces, long, in-depth research, that's usually set. We try to get ahead of that and say, and a good way to pitch that would be, what is seasonality telling you? What is coming up in the calendar of events that would be of interest to an editorial team? Is there some type of music celebration that could come up? I mean, Coachella was just happening, and there was all kinds of ideas around fashion around Coachella that all the entertainment sites were writing about what to wear at Coachella, which is a thing apparently. So you have to pay attention to these things.
There's big traffic there.
Big traffic. That's good. But right now, we know in the travel sector, people are looking at, obviously, vacations, and they're planning vacations if they haven't already. And so if there are particular ideas around that, like the British Virgin Islands right now, they're coming out of the hurricane. And so they are actively pitching some of the best deals. I know, because we're going to go, because there are some great opportunities there. Are you shilling
for a site right now?
No, I'm not shilling for any site.
Just so you can tell us what the site is.
No.
We'll add a link in the show notes.
But if you just look at the calendar, it'll tell you everything you need to know. Everything you need to know. There are times that you should pitch anytime there's an award ceremony of any kind. That is something that every entertainment site will cover. Every entertainment site will cover. It feels like every other week is Fashion Week in New York. So you can always talk about fashion in New York City. you know about the food space as well, and what I mean, the CSA boxes are about to start coming out.
Yeah.
That's a big thing as well from the food side. There is so many different ways that we get in front of editorial teams and say, just go look at your year-over-year traffic. When do people start caring about X? And then let's start getting it into the editorial calendar, because we know that interest is going to pick up. And Google Trends is fantastic for that, because it will show when do people start caring about the NFL? When do people start caring about the NBA playoffs? When do people start caring about food, drink, et cetera? Because it plays a part into it, and that's a great angle to pitch, because you know the editorial teams, smart editorial teams are looking at that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's probably some obvious ones and some non-obvious ones. I know if you have a good relationship with a publisher, you could actually request their calendar potentially, and we've gotten access to that before, where you see those themes that you're talking about that might not be obvious on the surface, which is a good point. So obviously, there's a lot of positive stuff there. I'm curious, I'm sure these big companies, the roadblocks you run into and how you're working to kind of like beat through those roadblocks.
Yeah, I don't get any roadblocks.
Like, I think the team structure, like you just kind of talked about, you never get those? That's crazy.
Is that sarcasm?
Sorry.
Yeah.
We don't do sarcasm.
That's funny. So there are those team structures where it's really hard to integrate with their process. So if there's people that, their job is to, create the editorial plan and, figure out the promotional plan and write the content and publish the content, sometimes it can be hard to be like, well, you hired us to theoretically help out with all of this, but you don't have as many inputs as you need for some of that. And then you feel like, you're trying really hard to make an impact there, but they have kind of a process that's moving forward. So I feel like in publishing, and especially news, team structures are still adapting to kind of where the BuzzFeed model, where it's at now, where teams are like siloed off and have a content producer in multimedia and video and images and marketing. And it's not just like, well, we created this, we send it over to marketing, maybe they hired one of us, then we get input over in this like third quadrant and maybe it filters down into what they're doing. If you can get inside a team that's like self-sufficient and has every facet of it, and then you're integrated into that team, I think those are the most successful content pieces. I'm sure that's been your experience too, where it's like you were part of the team that made this. And it wasn't like, oh, they sent it to us and we sent it back and who knows what happened after that.
Yeah, we are at a point where we try not to do anything or not interface with content teams with clients, because it goes way better when we do it end to end almost always. There's exceptions when the clients are great or it's technical topics and things like that. But anything else to add?
I find that with SEO, all roads eventually lead through tech. They're all going to go through tech, whether it's a CMS function or the CMS as a whole, to publish, to sitemaps, to interfacing with Google. I found that the most successful companies are those that have somebody that's their responsibility is to the technical side of SEO on a daily basis. I mean, AMP is a fickle beast. Google News is the Google News feed, the XML sitemap is a fickle beast, and how Google News reacts to the changing of small little details can be sometimes pretty cataclysmic if you make mistakes, if there is a problem with what the CMS is doing or how content is produced, or you accidentally put a certain character in a headline. Things like this can break, and if you don't have somebody monitoring the dials, I mean, you can miss on a really critical news cycle. And so we found that and that's the other thing, is that technical resources are always at a minimum, right? There's never, you never have a developer just sitting around saying, hey, what can I work on? It just doesn't exist. But if you can have somebody, and look, I think there's no better player right now than what the Washington Post is doing. So they have taken, and because obviously they've got some Amazon money and they've got resources, and they've gone all in on tech. You can see they are at the forefront of anything that's done on the technical SEO side. They're leading the charge, and it goes to show when you put enough resources into a technical SEO program, you can see that success. And that's not at all discounting what editorial does, but I'm saying that this is such a critical portion of it, and things break. When you've got 22 million pieces of content in an archive and active and hard news and breaking news and feature, yeah, things are going to break. And you got a CMS, and you got people that are trying to engage that CMS, and things break. And Google doesn't always react well to what you're doing, even when they tell you to.
That's a big one. The CMS is keeping up with what publishing demands now. Like you work with clients where it's just like, this is so hopelessly behind what your competitors are doing. Like we can't embed a video on this page. You're just like,
yeah.
Okay, so I think that updating, like the Washington Post is a good example. They have a CMS that can do a lot of stuff, and BuzzFeed just launched like, anybody can create a video. We have a video editor for all of our writers. They can shoot, embed it right here, and so there's video on pages that require it. If you have a CMS that was like, we built this in 2005 to handle 1 million pieces of content, it's gonna be just fields. And it's kind of depressing to try to compete with really good publishers when you have a CMS that's just like, publish your article. Here it is, that's all you got.
And Washington Post is producing ARC, and ARC is awesome and it's expensive. And those that are utilizing it, they realize like, oh, it's all here. Everything that I need.
For those unaware, what is ARC?
So ARC is the CMS that Washington Post developed and is now productizing. And you'll see there are certain organizations that have started to adopt ARC, and it's solid. It's a solid representation of what editorial SEO, that bridge between editorial and SEO and technical SEO needs to be. And it's all but push button at this point for them. But yeah, it's expensive, and they're
just another great Amazon.
Do you run into that when you're working? Or are you like, hey, we can handle this. We'll build pages that look good, that do what they need to do, or are you limited by
with
those
CMS limitations?
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it adds overhead to everything. It adds client interface time that it causes problems. But you guys, for most of our clients, we're not quite publishing at the scale as most publishers are. It's probably 4 to 10 posts a month, sometimes scaling up to 30 posts a month, but it's not 30 a day. So we're not as often limited by it, but we're definitely thinking about that day one. Is the CMS set up for us to succeed? What kind of overhead do we need to add in terms of
what
time?
are your limitations on
it? Or do we do often do CMS blog designs just because that's required to kind of like get to day one with clients.
That's interesting, because so 4 to 10 articles a month, you have to be incredibly strategic. Where, I think when you see the New York Times produces 1,500 articles a week, and that's a slow week. And that's changed since the last election, because there's even more content now, where it's a scatterplot approach to it, and things stick and some don't, and a lot of the traffic's coming from endemic users, where that puts a lot of pressure on all of you. To be very strategic,
Well, I mean, we definitely validate with social proof and search volume always, and we thankfully don't have to do 5 articles in a day. We're pitching week, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes more than 2 weeks to do our content. I think that sets us up, and not always. I still kind of say like 2 out of 3 assets will do well, really good, and then 1 is inevitably going to just hopefully not dud, but won't perform as yeah, exactly. So I think if you set those expectations up front, and you have more things to go off versus like some New York Times, I've seen some other things they're clearly spent into the tens and thousands of dollars on some of these interactive pieces. If you do one of those and it duds, that's kind of scary. We're kind of like walking the middle ground.
The big investment pieces.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's definitely room for those, but got to walk the line. But yeah, obviously you guys. We generate a lot of links for clients. Links we think are important. I'm so curious how publishers are thinking about links. Are they actively trying to generate them? I know a lot just kind of passively do through good content, but I'm curious what you're seeing there and how publishers think about that, and if you see anyone kind of deliberately trying to acquire them.
Yeah, I think some of the shrewder publishers are. We understand that the links that we get to individual pages can lead to us ranking hub pages or topic pages or central like pieces, so that they understand how link equity actually works and goes through a site. I think that's better than just like, hey, we have a lot of links and a lot of our content ranks. So if you want to rank for something, the news orgs that want to rank for, Minnesota Vikings news, or, big picture topics like, Nike's a good example. They need to figure out how to build links to that page and use the links that they've acquired to the other individual pages to push these central pages up, which is something that like e-commerce SEOs have been doing for 20 years. Like it's endemic to that industry, but publishers don't look at how link authority flows through a site as well. So I think one of the things that you can do is, if you really want to rank for some of these bigger, more competitive terms, it can't just be, we got links to articles on the Minnesota Vikings. We need to figure out how to build that the old hub and spoke strategy. If you want the hub, get links to the spokes, and then you can actually start building some links to the hub. So I think when you're doing that 30 pieces a day publishing, that gets harder. If you can be strategic and you're at that rate where you publish 5 pieces a month, you can really start to think through, what's the link architecture plan? When we build links, how do we want to structure it? And publishers are further behind on that than people that are doing, we are driven by e-commerce conversions. I think there's a little bit of a lag in publishers thinking about that correctly.
That makes sense. Anything to touch on there?
No, I mean, I think that says it all. I mean, from the notable brands don't really have to, of course they do have to worry about it, but it's not a central concern about how do we drive links to this when they have such a huge following on Twitter and on Facebook. I mean, that more or less serves the cause. But to Matthew's point is what happens once a crawler or a user comes into a page, whether that's through a side channel, through a link, or into a deep content page. How do you flow link equity through a site, through a page, and user paths as well? That becomes really, really important. And we've all seen the top stories, or you see what's trending modules. Those have become really helpful for a user perspective, from a user perspective as well as from a crawler perspective too. But yeah, I think the savvy publishers are the ones that say, once you get on that site, they treat every site as a homepage, as cliche as that is. They treat every site as every page as a homepage. And yes, and you see sites that don't do that. There are a lot of sites that you come in and you really don't know how to navigate through a site. And that, I would say, is more of a concern. It's more, and if you see what the New York Times is doing on their homepage now, they just made a pretty big change to it. It's rolling out. I don't know if you've seen this over the past couple weeks, but it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because that's to Matthew's point. That's the central hub. And how do we get users into content, these 1,500 pieces of content that are sitting really deep in a site? That's more of a concern right now than any external link would be.
Given how we think about links, like all of us, it's wasteful. It's shameful the way that they treat link authority on some of these sites. You're like, what are you doing? Like you could rank for so many competitive terms that are important to your brand and important to your site if you thought about this in the link architecture instead of just like, we just like the navigation.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do is freak out and look at the backlink profile, and then you can start getting strategic about it. Yeah.
Nice. Obviously, publishers have kind of shifted to different monetization models. It seems like review type content, like pushing to Amazon or other affiliate programs, is common. Obviously, the paywall. Are you guys seeing anything interesting, different, unique that's worth commenting on, or any other SEO considerations there that you found that are interesting or worth noting?
So the Seattle Times, they did this piece. It was on Pointer, where they had a hackathon, and the outcome of the hackathon was, we're going to build analytics dashboards that are tailored to what we want to do, which is sell subscriptions, to the paywall. They had a conversion event. There was a publisher that was like, instead of just raw traffic, there's something we want to do. And so the writers are starting to write stories that it's like, this got a lot of traffic, it got a lot of organic search visits, it got in the news, but it didn't do what we wanted it to do, which was we built an audience member. We built somebody that subscribes, that came back, that did that. And I think, for publishers, getting to what's your conversion event or events, what do you want to do, rather than just get a page view. And if you can get writers thinking our analytics dashboard says we need audience members and we need traffic that does a certain thing. Again, in e-commerce and other spaces, this is just rudimentary. But for publishers and writers to think we need something more than just traffic, we need to build audience, and we have analytics that can tell us how to do that. I think that's what's going to be something that makes a big difference for people doing content well going forward. Because raw traffic now, given how fickle Google and Facebook can be, page views go up, they go down. But building those audience members that do something specific on your site is something that most publishers don't think through well enough. And so Seattle Times was lucky enough that they had something like this is what we want people to do, and it kind of focused their efforts on what's happening.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, I think publishers, we're always going to chase page views. We have to. I mean, that's how those advertisements work. So, but to that end, I mean, when Matthew and I were at the Times, we went to the mat for this. When that the New York Times has been experimenting with all kinds of paywalls and meter models, and they've done a very good job. And they've shown that meter models work, and they've made it work. That loyal audiences will pay for good journalism. The New Yorker has figured this out as well. The Washington Post has figured this out, and the Wall Street Journal has always been a paid model. So it works.
Would you say that like one of the worst SEO moments you've had is when they put op-ed behind the paywall in 2007? Because we were like, anything that goes in op-ed gets thousands of links. They're like paywall. We're like, that's very bad for SEO. Yeah. That's bad for us.
We had just joined the New York Times, and they said, oh, by the way, we're going to put some of the most important sections of our site behind a wall where they're basically invisible.
We'd like to paywall the #1 link bait on the internet, if that's okay with you. It's like, awesome.
Maureen Dowd is now behind the wall.
Yeah, that's terrible.
And Frank Rich is behind the wall. All these seminal op-ed writers
it's much better now.
Are behind the wall. So our first objective when we were there was to get that wall down. And we saw first click free. Now Google is doing what they can to basically help publishers be successful with meter models. There's structured data that is a great way to give the engines access to the content. Because first click free isn't alive. I mean, they basically sunsetted that project about a year ago, I think is what it is. So they're trying to actively work. And then even today, I mean, as Google I/O, there was the big announcement of what's happening with Google News now. And Newsstand and how AMP, and they're all playing nice together at this point. And that's great. That's what we want to see happen.
Are you seeing a shift in models on how people think about paywalls versus raw page view generation and what you see?
I mean, for the most part, we don't work with that many publishers. We consult with a few, so it's not as applicable to us as often, to be honest. But yeah, kind of wrapping things up, curious if you have any specific tools you find useful, or like an actionable tip that you think every publisher should be doing, something you're excited about, like what is that one thing that people should know and kind of should be left with?
I'm excited. It took me a while, but I'm excited about AMP. The thought of giving content over to Google, I was not a fan of that. For a long time, I was not a fan of it. But then I saw the traffic numbers, and we saw across the board about 26% increase in just AMP traffic last year across the board of all of our publishers. That's huge. That's Google saying, we're going all in on this. And so you need to do everything you can to amplify your content. I'm excited about it because it opens a whole new world. And then, of course, there's mobile first, which has everybody freaking out. Everybody wants to talk about mobile first, what that means. But if you look at it, it's been here for a long time. The mobile first approach has been here for a while. So I think I'm not as excited is not the right word, but I really do think that AMP is something that we're going to continue to focus on. And as much as I didn't want it to be successful, I'm glad it is.
I'm interested to kind of turn that into something you mentioned earlier in terms of the Seattle Times. I think you mentioned had a conversion. That's traditionally been an issue with AMP. I don't know if that's improved recently, or is that at conflict with potentially going towards AMP, is now you don't have a clear way to measure your conversion.
They got a lot of complaints early on about, hey, you're ruining everything we're trying to do when somebody lands on an AMP page. And so they've been, obviously, because they want it to propagate, they've been pretty responsive about different ad units you can use, navigational links, how you can structure a page. They're getting a little more loose
analytics
on
and threading analytics.
Threading analytics, and what HTML is valid in AMP. So, if they want this to be accepted and not rejected by publishers overall across the web, they're going to have to adapt.
Make it work.
And they still catch static all the time. There's an entire wing of design and developers that's Google AMP is ruining the web. So they're going to have to make sure that that's not like AMP is the evil empire. They're going to have to continue to really be publisher friendly, which is great, because I think that the more Google looks at their users are obviously their number one priority, but the ecosystem of what they're serving to their users, they need to be nice to people that are making good content.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, okay, you drove us out of business. You have no good content to rank in your results. So I think that they're motivated to keep everything healthy in that way, and so I hope that they adhere to that. Although every now and then I read something, I'm like, why are they doing this? This is going to be very bad. People are going to not like this.
Nice.
So I think it's kind of a balance.
So circling back to my question, I'm curious what your specific thing or tool or idea is.
I think that one thing that's happening is for organic search, Google is changing so fast that I think that you can't set an organic search strategy for longer than, obviously more than a quarter, but you can't be like, this year we're doing this in organic search and we're not going to move. Because 3 months into it, Google could be like, yeah, there's nothing but answer boxes here, or it's now essentially a zero result SERP, where the click is going one place and you're still trying to get ranked on page 1 and up into that top 5. So I think that you need to be really responsive and adapt much more quickly on, okay, for organic search, we need to factor this in, that these changes are made. I'm sure we'll digest what happened to Google I/O with news and go to our clients, okay, this is what we need to know. This is how it changes things. I don't think you can set an annual, let's do this for search strategy and not have it be, in flux in some degree, or Google to move it around to where you don't have a meeting every 3 months that says, here's what we're doing next.
That makes sense. Yeah, this is really interesting and useful, and I think hopefully publishers will find it of value, and I think non-publishers too. There's some interesting takeaways here for us, and hopefully other people as well. So I appreciate you guys both coming in.
Thanks.
Yeah,
great.
thanks.
And if you're watching at home, appreciate it if you give this a thumbs up. Check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and let us know what you thought in the comments. Thanks for watching.